entrepreneurs. And I'm just going to take a moment to share my screen so you can see our presentation slides. I'm going to try to move this thing out of the way. Sorry about that, folks. Okay, I think we'll have to just deal with this bar up top. So thank you everyone for attending our presentation today. First off, we would like to thank the interpreters that we have working with us today for your essential work. Ana Rueda de Vidales, interpreting for Spanish, Kian Trong for Vietnamese, and Wei Quan Tong for Cantonese. Thank you so much. And as I said, my name is Tobias Damloer. I'm a staff attorney at Sustainable Economies Law Center. I work with worker co-op clients, especially worker co-ops owned by immigrants. And I also work with housing co-op clients. And I'll give my colleague Itzel a moment to introduce herself as well.
Cool. Thanks, Tobias. Hi, everyone. My name is Itzel Nuno. I've been at the Law Center almost 3 years now. Prior to working at the Law Center, I was doing immigrant rights coordinating across the state of California. And now at the Law Center, I work very closely with Tobias on our co-op clients, specifically immigrant-led co-ops. And very excited to be able to sort of build a bridge between my past work and the work that I'm doing now. And I am not an attorney. I'm a project coordinator. So if I say anything incorrectly, Tobias will jump in and correct me. But I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Itzel. And Itzel, I think you know a lot, and you could even correct me if I say something wrong. So I think it's mutual. Just a quick disclaimer for everyone today that the information we're going to give in this presentation is specific to California. If you're in another state, there might be another legal entity for an immigrant-owned cooperative that's better for your situation and in your state. The information we're going to give to you today is not legal advice that you can rely upon for your individual situation. It's just general information, and we hope it's helpful to you. And also, it's not a way to get legal immigration status in the United States, unfortunately. We at SELC believe that the immigration system in the United States is based upon racism and capitalism, and it's exploitative. And so we're not agreeing with the way that the immigration system works. And we're presenting this material to you today as a way to legally work in the United States, even if the immigration system in the United States doesn't allow you to work as an employee. So we hope that it's useful for you if you're trying to earn money for you and your family. I'll just go over the agenda today. first, Itzel will be talking about worker-owned cooperatives. Then Itzel will be talking about working in the United States while undocumented. Then I'll be talking a little bit about how to set up a worker-owned cooperative. And then we'll have a section about resources where you can find more information about these topics. And then we'll have time for some questions and answers from the audience. So now I'll give it over to Itzel to talk about worker-owned cooperatives.
Perfect. Thanks, Tobias. Yeah, so I'm going to start off by talking just a bit generally about what worker-owned cooperatives are. There's a lot more like information and nuance, but want to just start off by giving a general breakdown of what we're talking about when we say worker-owned cooperatives. And then we'll move into the specifics of worker-owned cooperatives for folks who don't have work authorization. We can do the next slide. And before jumping like right into the details of worker-owned cooperatives, I wanted to sort of create the context in which we talk about it at the Law Center. You know, we're always trying to gear our work, at least our labor-related work, towards creating what folks call the solidarity economy. And so that's moving from our existing extractive economy, where many people end up working at workplaces that can be coercive and exploitative, and profit is really prioritized above all. We want to think about an economy in which people's needs are actually being met at their workplaces, where they have a say over their conditions of their work. And really an economy that actually gets reoriented and isn't so focused on wealth accumulation, and actually is looking to build a community resilience and take care of our natural environment and find ways to create more social equity. And so that's the context in which the Law Center approaches worker-owned cooperatives. This is the world that we're trying to build. So yeah, I'll just start jumping into some of the specifics around what we're talking about when we're talking about worker-owned co-ops. Can you do next slide, please? So worker-owned cooperatives are for-profit businesses that touch on the following three things. First is that they're worker-owned. So all the folks who work at the business also own the business. Sometimes they'll be referred to as members or worker owners. It kind of depends on the terms that they choose to use in their legal documents. I think for now, I'm probably going to call them worker owners. And this is important for many reasons, but one of them is that since they are both the owners of the business, but also the workers of the business, they have an invested interest in meeting the needs of all of the workers. And so it is focused, obviously, to an extent on making money. And however, there is a huge interest by everybody to also ensure that there are fair wages and healthy working conditions. And so those become a big part of the priorities of the people who own and work the business. Secondly, they are democratically governed. So all of the major decisions are made by the worker owners themselves. And it's really important to note that they all have equal voting power. So each person gets one vote, and it's not dependent on how much money someone might have invested into the cooperative or not. Everyone just automatically has the same amount of voice, the same amount of power over the decisions of the workplace. And lastly, they distribute earnings equitably. So the profit is distributed to the worker owners based on the amount of work and quality of work that they did, and has nothing to do with any amount of money that might have been invested. And so the power really lies in the people and not in any of the investment that might have not been made. Next slide, please. And so now we'll start getting slowly into why worker-owned cooperatives are a great option for people who don't have work authorization. And yeah, just to note, there was a point at which we would just talk about folks as undocumented people, but there is a distinction between folks who might be undocumented and people who don't have work authorization. So we just really talk specifically about folks who don't have work authorization in the United States. And so if you are a worker owner of a cooperative, you are not considered an employee under immigration law, and therefore you don't need to fill out a work authorization form. But your cooperative needs to have these 4 key aspects to it. It needs to be registered as an LLC with the Secretary of State. So that's the business entity that you choose to register. And it needs to be, as I mentioned, worker owned. So all the owners are also the workers and vice versa. Democratically governed, everyone has equal voting power, and the earnings are distributed cooperatively. And so, yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this point, but it's really important to note that if your co-op meets all of these, then you might not be considered an employee under immigration law. Next slide, please. Okay, so yeah, so now I'm just going to get more into the weeds of how it is that folks without work authorization can legally work in the US through a worker-owned cooperative. Next slide. So in terms of employment law, federal law, prohibits the employment of undocumented immigrants who don't have work authorization. So whenever you're starting a job, if you're trying to be an employee, part of that process is always going to be to fill out an I-9 form. And the I-9 form is used as a way for the government to check if people have work authorization in the United States or not. And so this is essentially the obstacle that folks are facing when they don't have work authorization and are trying to work, is that you are not able to be an employee since you wouldn't be able to fill out the I-9 that is required. Next slide. And so now we want to talk about the options that folks who don't have work authorization have to work. So if you are working in the United States, you're either going to be classified as an employee or as an independent contractor. For employees, as you can see here, it means that you're working under someone's supervision and control. So there's somebody who's telling you what you need to do, how you need to get it done, when, they have control over your schedule and all of these things. You are required to complete the I-9 form, which again is checking to see if someone has work authorization. And this is not a legal option for folks who don't have work authorization. If you can't fill out the I-9, you won't be hired as an employee. Now, the second option is an independent contractor, and this is what we're going to go into more in detail. Generally, this means that you are working on your projects without control or supervision, with your own tools and at the risk that you might lose money. So, you'll be contracted for a certain job, but you have a lot of say of how and when that job will be done. You're most likely going to be using your own tools, and the risk of money is more in terms of if you all agree that the work will take you 10 hours to complete and it actually takes you longer, that is the way in which you're risking potentially losing money. And really important is that this does not require filling out an I-9. It's not required to have work authorization in the US in order to be an independent contractor. And so since being classified as an employee is not a legal option for folks who don't have work authorization, we're going to talk about working as an independent contractor. Next slide, please.
We did have a question in the chat It says, how many people do we need for to open this kind of LLC? I'll go ahead actually and unmute the attendee that wants to ask that question.
Hello?
Hi.
Hello?
Hi, can you hear us?
Yes. My question is, how many people is required for have this kind of LLC? Because the regular LLC I know is just need one, but this look like a scope, look like it's more people, at least two. And also, it's necessary that they are just all of them are undocumented entrepreneur, or can be mixed. So one can be citizen and another undocumented entrepreneur. What is the regulation for this kind of LLC? Or it's a regular LLC?
Yeah, thank you for your question. We are also gonna get a little bit more in detail on how to set it up. So if I don't answer it right now, Tobias will have a chance to. And so this is a regular LLC, in terms of how you register with the Secretary of State. We are gonna go over information that talks about how you want to organize your LLC internally to make it an option for folks who don't have work authorization so that it lessens the risk of them being classified as an employee. And so, yeah, so there'll be a little bit more information about that. You only need one person, right, Tobias, to register an LLC, and this
Correct.
as well. And folks can be mixed status. So you can have folks that have work authorization working alongside folks who don't have work authorization. Is there anything else you want to add, Tobias?
No, thank you so much.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. Thank you, Itzel.
Okay, great. Yeah. And yeah, just let us know if we keep on, if you have more questions or if we didn't answer it entirely. But yeah, just to highlight what I mentioned is that what we're going to really be focusing on is ways to set up your LLC so that it is less risky for folks who don't have work authorization. Okay, so where was I? Oh, yes, we're here. So for, yeah, independent contractors, like I said, you do not need to fill out an I-9. And so we're going to continue talking about the independent contractor route, and then it'll sort of lead into the LLC part of the conversation. Next slide, please. Okay, so if you start doing business without registering your business as an entity with the Secretary of State, then you are not considered an employee, right? So if it is only one person doing this, you're considered a sole proprietor. And if there's two people doing this business together without being registered with the Secretary of State, then you are a general partnership. And again, neither of these options require filling out an I-9 since you're not being employed by anyone. You are running this business. You fall under these categories when you're operating a business that you have a business license for, but it's not registered as a separate entity, meaning that you are the business in the case of the sole proprietor, or you and your partners are the business in the case of a general partnership. There is not a separate business that is registered, a separate entity that is registered. Next slide. And so that, that is an option for folks who don't have work authorization to just begin working without registering a business, right? As I mentioned, you don't need to fill out an I-9 to do that. And so then the question is, if you can work as an independent contractor without filling out an I-9, then why not just do that and not form a worker co-op? And we want to talk a bit about some of the benefits of the risk and the benefits. And so doing work as an independent contractor, if you don't have work authorization, could be risky still, because under US immigration law, it is unlawful to knowingly hire an independent contractor who doesn't have work authorization. So even though it's not against the law for somebody who doesn't have work authorization to work as an independent contractor, it is against the law for somebody to hire an independent contractor if they know that they don't have work authorization. So a way to lessen this risk could be to create a separate business entity. Next slide, please. So if you decide to create a separate business entity, meaning you go to the Secretary of State and you register your business as an entity, this will help, one, by creating an additional layer of anonymity, right? Because your business is who people will be signing contracts with, and your business is going to be have that client relationship, not you as an individual. And so, yeah, the client contracts are going to be with that business, not you as a person. Next slide, please. And so here we kind of try to show visually what we're talking about, right? At the bottom, you have the client, and the client is going to be signing a contract with the entity, with the LLC, with the co-op. And the contracts will be between the two of those, and the money will be passed between the two of those. And then at the top, the co-op is then passing the money over to the worker owners. And so again, this makes it a lot harder for the client. They're not actually going into a contract with an independent contractor who doesn't have work authorization. They're going into a contract with an LLC. And so that sort of gets around that risk of where it's illegal for people to go into contracts, to hire independent contractors knowing they don't have work authorization. So this creates sort of a shield between the worker owners and the client themselves that really helps to mitigate that risk on the side of the client. And next slide, please. Okay, and so as I mentioned, it's helpful to create a separate entity, right? So that there is that level of separation. And it's important to register as an LLC if you're going to have worker owners that don't have work authorization. Because under LLCs, if they're structured the way that I talked before, then worker owners are not considered employees, as long as, like I said, that they're all actually actively managing the business together. And so, yeah, if there's ways to prove that everyone is getting the equal amount of decision power on salaries, on the type of work that we're going to do, on contracts and all of this stuff, then the folks that own and work at an LLC are not considered employees. They're considered worker owners. A co-op could also be a cooperative corporation, but the way that is structured typically does lend worker owners to be considered employees. And so that's not a suitable option for folks who don't have work authorization. And so we are going to focus a little bit more on specifically setting up LLCs for folks who don't have work authorization, rather than going over any of the other entity options that there are. Next slide. I think I have one slide left before I hand it back to you. Oh yeah, I think you have to click to get there we go. You can just click it all, I didn't know. So the other reason that we recommend to folks to register as a separate entity and to not just remain as an independent contractor or general partnership is because it also provides a limited liability shield, right? So if you are not registered as a separate entity, then you yourself are the business. So if for some reason you were to be sued by one of your clients, then all of your personal assets are at risk, right? Your home, your car, all of that stuff. However, if you do register as a separate legal entity and someone sues your business, they can't reach your bank account or your home. They are only able to, it's only the assets that are owned by the business that would be at risk in that situation. And so it adds this additional shield of protection that protects your personal assets from any liabilities that are incurred by the business. And I think that's all for me. I'll hand it back over to Tobias. I think I see we have some questions. Maybe we can get through Tobias's section since I think it might cover some of them. And then we can come back if folks still have questions. Over to you, Tobias.
Thank you, Itzel. And now that Itzel has talked about why cooperatively run LLCs are a good option for entrepreneurs who don't have work authorization, I'm going to provide some tips about how to set up an LLC in the most beneficial way for this situation. So as Itzel mentioned, in order to avoid being considered employees, the member owners of an LLC all need to actively manage and govern the LLC together equally. Well, what does that mean in practice? It doesn't really mean that every decision has to be approved by all the owners. So different owners can be responsible for making like routine, everyday decisions in different areas of the operations. Like you could have committees of owners of the LLC that are each responsible for making decisions about certain parts of the business. It's just that when it comes to major decisions, for example, pay, pricing, benefits, accepting new members, and the overall direction of the business, all the owners have to have an equal say. So that means you can't have one owner or a small group of owners making all the major decisions for everyone else. Because if that happens, then one person or a small group of people is acting like a boss, and the other owners are more likely to be considered employees, even though on paper they own a share of the company. Also, for these kinds of LLCs, where it's important that no one is an employee, it's important to stay small, like around 10 to 15 owners. And Marilyn, I think this goes to the question that you were asking about how many people should be in this LLC. This is more like our suggested maximum number of members. We don't really there's no legal rule in any law that we know of for the maximum number of members of LLCs. Sorry, the maximum number of members in this kind of LLC. It's just that the more you grow, the more likely it is that some of the member owners won't participate in decision making at all. And if they don't, then they're more likely to be considered employees. So that's the reason why we suggest that you keep the LLC no bigger than 10 to 15 owners. So because of the requirements around governance, that means decision making, there are a couple of important things to pay attention to when you're setting up an LLC that's democratically run. First, there's an important choice to make when you're registering the LLC with the Secretary of State. When you're doing this, the first document you file is a one-page form called the Articles of Organization. And this form contains the name of the LLC and some other basic information. The form has choices you can pick about the LLC's management style, and you should make sure to specify on the form that the LLC will be managed by all members, and that's because all the member owners need to have an equal say in important decisions. Second, when you're filing taxes for the LLC, you have to choose from several different types of tax treatment on both the federal and the state levels. When you're choosing what type of tax treatment you want, it's important to choose partnership taxation, which basically means that all the LLC's income for the year gets allocated or divvied up among each of the member owners, and that the owners each pay taxes on their share of income. So in other words, the LLC itself doesn't pay taxes on the income it generates. Only the owners pay taxes on their share of that income. You could also choose to have the LLC taxed as if it were a corporation. And this doesn't mean that the LLC is converted to a corporation on the state level. It still stays registered as an LLC with the Secretary of State. Instead, having the LLC taxed as a corporation means that the LLC itself pays taxes on its income each year, and the owners also pay taxes on whatever money they get from the LLC. If you choose to have the LLC taxed as a corporation, then the LLC owners might be considered employees because owners of corporations tend to be viewed as employees by default. So this is the reason why you want to choose partnership taxation and not taxation as a corporation. You may also be wondering, if we set up an LLC where none of the owners are employees, how do we make sure to get a stable income to support ourselves and our families? One solution to this is something called guaranteed payments, which is like an advance on profits. It's basically a set amount of money that each member owner gets for their work, and it can be per hour, per week, per month, or per job. Of course, the advantage of guaranteed payments is that they provide a stable income in the early stages of the business. They do come with a slight risk of being considered wages, and therefore the risk that people receiving the guaranteed payments could be considered employees. So we recommend that you clearly state the formula for guaranteed payments, either in the operating agreement for the LLC or at least in a member handbook that you write up for all the members that contains the rules that are not in the operating agreement that the member owners have to abide by. And just so you know, in case you don't know already, the operating agreement for an LLC is like the bylaws for a corporation. Basically, it's a document that contains all of the rights and responsibilities of the member owners, and it spells out how the owners make decisions and how they distribute profits to themselves. Speaking of which, the operating agreement is also the place to specify that the profits are distributed based on how much you work, not how much money you put in, and that each member has one vote when making decisions together. This is important to show that no one member is in charge of the others and to ensure that the owners all govern their business democratically together as equals. Just on a separate note, we also wanted to briefly mention that business licenses are an important thing for any person who's starting a small business to obtain. And there was recently a law that got passed called AB 2184 that allows, the law requires all cities and counties in California to allow undocumented people who don't have work authorization to obtain a business license, either with an individual taxpayer identification number, with a state ID number, a driver's license number, or a municipal ID number. So if you see that your city or county's business license application form still requires a social security number, that city or county is violating this law and needs to update their form. So I wanted to sum up and give a few additional tips for setting up an immigrant-owned LLC worker cooperative where some or all of the members don't have work authorization. First, like I mentioned, members should all participate in the management of the co-op, especially when it comes to big decisions. You can delegate some of the decision-making to individual members as needed, but everyone needs to participate and vote on the big decisions. Second, it's best to stay relatively small, preferably a maximum of 10 to 15 member owners. Third, you can use guaranteed payments as a way to provide stable income. And it's good to make sure that the formula for these payments is included in the LLC operating agreement or in the member handbook. In addition, I wanted to just briefly mention a tip that we have about candidacy periods. So candidacy periods are periods where a co-op will welcome in a new member, sort of like as a probationary period where they're testing out whether the new member is a good fit for the co-op. And during this period, it's generally easier to end the new member's membership if the member isn't a good fit. Our suggestion is that you should avoid this kind of probationary period because if someone doesn't have full rights during this period, like for example, to vote on decisions, and they're just following orders of the other members, it's more likely that they are actually an employee and not a member owner. So you should consider bringing people on as full members right away if it's possible for you. Another tip is, in addition to bringing people on as full members right away, that you can also use a longer interview process to get to know potential members more before you agree to accept them into the co-op. Like, for example, you can use a week-long series of interviews where the members learn about the co-op and like attend presentations or, observe meetings, and just spend the whole week getting to know the members of the co-op before they actually join as full members and get approved to do that by the co-op. Our final suggestion is to make sure to join regional and national worker cooperative organizations. For example, Prospera, Network of Bay Area Worker Co-ops, and the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. We suggest this because these organizations are important sources of ongoing support and mutual aid for worker co-ops. Now I'm going to talk briefly about some useful resources for immigrant-owned worker co-ops. And just so you know, I think everyone's going to get a copy of the slides, right, Anna?
Yes, we will share all resources that we have, as well as a recording of each of the different languages. Tobias,
Okay.
do you want to answer some of the questions before you got onto the resources piece?
Yeah, sure. That sounds good.
Sure. There was a question about how much it costs to establish an LLC. I think you did go over some of the requirements. But yeah, there was a question about that. And then there's another question about why would a corporation expose undocumented owners more than an LLC?
Got it. Itzel, do you want to take any of those questions? Just giving you first
I
dibs.
can start or try.
Okay.
So there are, and correct me if I mess this up, there are two documents that you need to submit to register an LLC, and one of them is the Articles of Organization.
Mhm.
I was just quickly looking it up, and I believe right now the fee for that is $70. Um, and then after you do that, you submit what is called a Statement of Information, and that one costs $20 to submit. And so that is what you pay to register, and then every year that your LLC is registered and active, there is an $800 fee you pay to the franchise tax board.
Yeah.
There's
Correct.
some exceptions to that right now. I believe they're not charging that for folks who are registering an LLC before the end of the year. But yeah, there's also some timelines in which you pay that $800 fee. But Tobias, you were probably going to say something more accurate.
Oh, no, that's all correct. And I just wanted to add that the $800 fee needs to be paid regardless of whether the LLC has any income or profits at all during any year. It's a fee that you need to pay in California just for the just for having an active LLC that's registered with the Secretary of State.
And in terms of requirements, I mean, essentially they're going to ask you questions about like the members, the physical address of the business. And that is where you will need somebody to have an ITIN number, an ITIN, or if somebody has a social security number. Is that correct, Tobias?
I don't believe they ask for those numbers on the LLC articles of an organization or statement of information, but you do need to have an ITIN or a social security number to get an employer identification number from the IRS. And you need the employer identification number both to file taxes for the business and then also to get the business license from the city or the county where you're doing business.
Did you want to touch on the difference between LLC and a co-op corporation in terms of the risks to folks who don't have work authorization?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So basically, the courts that have decided questions about who is a business owner but not an employee and who is a business owner and an employee, the courts who have decided those questions have said that if you're a partner in a partnership, then and you fulfill certain criteria, like for example, it's hard to fire you. You don't really, you're not really under the control of anyone else. You have like a right to a significant amount of the profits every year, et cetera. Like they say that if you're a partner in a business and you meet those requirements, then you are not an employee. And so LLCs that are LLCs can be taxed as partnerships. They could also be taxed as corporations, but we recommended against choosing that tax classification. But if they're taxed as a partnership, then they're in line with those like court decisions where courts have said that like partners in a partnership, you know, if they meet these criteria, then they're not employees. Whereas they've said that about corporations, they've said that, you know, even if owners of the corporation work for the business, by default, they're still generally employees. So that's the reason why. I'm not sure if you had any follow-up questions to that, Mariana.
Okay, thanks. Looks like they're good.
Thank you for your question. Let's see here. I can go to Marilyn Alvarado's question about receiving funding, unless there are any other questions that you think I should get to first. I haven't been monitoring the chat really carefully, Anna, so.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. So the question is, I have a startup. I am able to receive funding only from an accredited investor or from an angel investor if I am undocumented, or in my case, my visa is in the appeal process. I don't think that there would be any, again, you know, I'm not an immigration lawyer, and so I don't really know how receiving funding could affect your visa appeal process. If you're being represented by an immigration lawyer, I would definitely ask them about that, like the effect of receiving funding for your business from these investors, if that has any effect on your visa appeal process. But from, you know, the being considered an employee or not, and whether you're violating immigration law by receiving funding, I don't think that you would be violating immigration law just by receiving funding from them, as long as you make sure that your business is structured in such a way that you're not an employee. But again, we can only provide you general information in this presentation. So if you want more information, or sorry, if you want legal advice about this, I would welcome you to come to either our legal cafe events, which we're going to talk about after the resources, or the legal clinics of LCCR SF or Start Small, Think Big. I do want to add, though, that I think investors sometimes, I've heard that investors sometimes like to invest in a corporation more than an LLC, just because it's easier for them from a paperwork perspective. And like, you know, corporations have shares that they can then like sell back to the corporation, whereas an LLC membership interest is maybe like more difficult to value. And I'm actually not sure of the details, but I've heard that some investors prefer to invest in corporations more than LLCs, but you would have to ask the investors about that. Did I answer the question, Marilyn?
They said yes in the chat.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm just gonna go down the line. In Spanish, I think from Marcos Jaimes. Would you be able to help with that, Itzel?
Yeah, if you run an LLC, do you have to pay more taxes?
Oh, okay. I I think it depends on your individual tax situation. You would be best to consult with like a tax advisor, tax preparer, or accountant about that. I can just offer that, as we said, LLCs tax as partnerships. Generally speaking, they allocate or like divide up the profit at the end of each year among all the owners of the LLC. And even if they don't pay out that profit to the owners of the LLC, then the owners still have to report that as income on their taxes. So even if they didn't receive it, then they still have to like pay taxes on it. You might be able to like pay yourself a certain amount of guaranteed payments so that you can cover the tax burden at the end of the year. But again, a tax advisor would be best suited to advise you more on that, or like a tax preparer. Did I answer your question, Marcos? If you're talking, you're muted. I'm
They
sorry.
said
Okay. Let's see, going down the line, is there an organization that you can refer us to who can help us with taxes for LLC for undocumented? That's a great question. I believe that Mission Economic Development Agency has tax advice, although I think that they may have stopped that but I don't know if anyone else on this call knows of like general tax help resources. And there may be something that I'm forgetting about that's actually listed in the presentation. So forgive me if I did. We're
We can
actually coming up with like oh, sorry, go ahead on Anna.
Oh yeah, we can ask around to see. We also have a another webinar coming up with regarding taxes, and we'll have a tax attorney there to maybe
Wonderful.
answer some questions. If it's like more specific to their situation, we can have them at our virtual legal clinic. And then if it goes beyond like more, it needs more time and support, we can find a referral or someone who might be able to support.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Anna. Another question from Ara, is this information also good for businesses based in New York or only California? So this information is only good for businesses that are based in California, although a lot of it is probably applicable and good information if your business is based in New York, because a lot of states have the same laws about LLCs, and immigration law is federal, so that applies to all states. However, we can't guarantee that this information is applicable in states outside of California. So, it's probably largely applicable in New York, but we can't guarantee it, unfortunately. Let's see here.
I think that's all the questions we had. We have 1 minute left if we want to just at least show the resources on the slide, but we'll be sharing them with everyone too. So
thank you, Itzel, for the time check. Yeah, we have resources here about how to set up your own business, focusing on business planning. And there are some organizations that have resources in multiple languages and specialize in immigrant-owned businesses. And here's an organization that specializes in worker co-ops. Here are some resources for the legal aspects of setting up your own business. And here are some co-op specific written resources. Here are some resources for funding. And here are some resources for protecting your personal things you own, assets, in case of deportation or detention that you hopefully don't, but that you might experience as an undocumented person. And we thank you very much for your attendance here, and to LCCRSF for having us. In the slides is a link to our legal cafe where you can meet with a volunteer lawyer. We'd also very much encourage you to go to LCCRSF's legal clinic or Start Small, Think Big. And thank you again to LCCRSF for having us. And thank you again to our wonderful interpreters.
Thank you, Tobias and Itzel, for supporting this webinar today. And thank you to everyone for attending. We will be sending the information out via email. We will be sending all the recordings of the webinar as well as the presentation slides. Thank you so much for your questions. We hope to, if you have any additional ones, to see you at our virtual legal clinic. It's a really quick registration to attend, and we're happy to help. All right, thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.